When the people of England first set foot on this land, there was only one thing in their dreams: gold. In their minds, this world was like a lost treasure, where wealth was hidden beneath every stone. Some of them even came thinking that perhaps after taking just a few steps, they would find gold mines that would change their entire lives. But nature had something else in store for them. They did not find gold, but they did meet a personality whose age was only 10 years, yet whose decisions laid the foundation for an entire nation in the times to come. This girl is counted among the few figures in American history who, without any army or power, changed the course of events simply through her presence. Today, the beaches of Virginia attract thousands of tourists with their white and golden sand. But 500 years ago, this place lay deserted. People did live here, but far from the shore, in deep forests, along rivers, and in scattered villages. At that time, this area was under the influence of the Powhatan Confederacy, a strong alliance of more than 30 tribes. These tribes lived for miles in dozens of villages. They had their own forests, their own fields, their own language, and their own traditions. And in the heart of them lay that shore where history was about to take a new turn. In 1607, 3 British ships arrived at this shore. On board were 104 Englishmen, who had weapons, tools, and hopes, but they did not have the courage to face the reality and experience of the land. As soon as they landed, they went to a small area, surrounded on 3 sides by water. They found this place safe not because life was easy there, but because they were more concerned about protection from attacks. They established a colony and named it Jamestown in honor of their king. The river was also named James River. In the early days, the English pitched tents, built long wooden fences, and constructed a strong fort. The fort was triangular in shape, with a tall tower at each corner, each equipped with a cannon. Inside this small fort, they built a house, a grain warehouse, and a church. The English felt threatened from all sides, from Spain, and also from the local tribes, whom they mistakenly called Indians. But the real danger was not anyone. The real enemy was hunger. The land around Jamestown was marshy. Crops could not grow there, and living was not easy. Within a few days, food ran out. People started falling ill, and many died. The colony stood on the brink of destruction. It was at this time that, for the first time, the 10-year-old girl appeared on the scene. Pocahontas. Her real name was Matoaka, but because of her playful nature, everyone called her Pocahontas. She was the daughter of the Powhatan King, the tiny princess of the Confederacy. Meanwhile, one day Jamestown's captain, John Smith, went into the forest with 2 companions. He ventured deep into the Powhatan tribe's territory, but 200 local warriors attacked him. Both of his companions were killed, and he was captured. The tribes brought him before the king. The king tried to understand a lot from Smith, but the language barrier left the conversation incomplete. Some misunderstandings occurred. Some fear arose. And then the king ordered, "Kill him." Smith's head was placed on a stone, and a large club was about to strike his skull when suddenly Pocahontas ran forward. She placed her head over Smith's. According to tradition, the king, faced with his daughter's insistence, changed his decision. John Smith's life was saved. After that, the king kept her for a while, treated her with hospitality, and then sent her back to Jamestown safely. Pocahontas often came to Jamestown carrying food, fruits, dried meat, and water. Because of her, the colony survived the famine crisis, giving the English a chance to stay alive. Time passed, and trade began. The tribes provided food, the English gave small tools, and thus, trust between the two grew. In the early days, there was a strange harmony between the Powhatan and the British settlers. The Native American tribes would bring grains, corn, fruits, and other food from the lands around their homes, and in return, the English would give them iron tools, small weapons, and everyday metal goods. For some time, this exchange was beneficial for both. It was as if a silent agreement existed, with neither enmity nor threat. But just as the end of a beautiful season suddenly comes, so too did this period of affection not last long. The hearts and needs of both peoples began to change. The real trouble began when the English of Jamestown increased their demand for food, but the Powhatan tribes themselves had little food, so where could they bring more to give? Virginia at that time was suffering from a severe famine. Rainfall was low, crops failed, and the forests seemed silent. In such a situation, the tribes had only enough grain to barely survive themselves. The question of extra food did not even arise. As food became scarce, smiles also diminished, and the friendship that had existed slowly began to fall apart. In this situation, John Smith made another attempt to manage the circumstances. At the beginning of 1609, he went to meet the Powhatan King. The meeting was very pleasant throughout the day. Conversations were held, food was eaten, everything seemed as before. But at night, Smith suddenly woke up. A faint sob reached his ears. He saw Pocahontas sitting next to him crying. In a trembling voice she told him that her father had made a decision. By morning, Smith would be killed. The ground seemed to slip from under Smith's feet. This was the second time the young Powhatan princess had saved the life of an Englishman, or perhaps laid the foundation for a greater future that would shift the balance of power. Smith immediately woke his companions and escaped from there in the darkness of night. Pocahontas also sent a message to the people of Jamestown, and thus, dozens of lives were saved. Soon after, Smith was injured in an accident and sent back to England. Immediately after his departure, a new governor and more people arrived from England to Jamestown. The population began to increase. Conditions seemed to improve again. White settlers visited the tribes, witnessed their hospitality, and some even began living among them. But this was a time when most of the people coming from Europe were men. Women were very few, and the English settlers began to take wrongful advantage of this imbalance. Over time, attacks also began. Those who, frustrated by the lack of food, went to live among the tribes were called traders in Jamestown. If anyone was caught, they were often burned alive or subjected to painful punishments. Such incidents distanced the Powhatan family, especially Pocahontas, from Jamestown. And then came the time known in Jamestown's history as the Starving Time. The famine of 1609 had reached its peak. At the same time, 300 more people arrived from England, but they too had no food for themselves. Jamestown was already plagued by famine, dirty water, and disease. Now hundreds more hungry and thirsty people arrived. Winter was approaching. Harsh, merciless winters, the very mention of which filled people's eyes with fear. There was no game, no crops. The little food that existed was about to run out. In a few days, people began to die of hunger. Around 100 settlers perished. The children ate their pets, dogs, cats, even boiled leather shoes to fill their stomachs. But when even this ran out, humans began to walk a path that is horrifying to imagine. They dug up the graves of their dead companions, took out the corpses, cut the flesh, and ate it. When blood came out of the weak and half-dead, it was licked. It was a time when the instinct to survive outweighed humanity. Later, during excavations, experts found the bones of a 14-year-old girl. From the condition of her skull, it was clear that she too had been eaten during the days of famine. She was later given the name Jane, as a silent memorial of Jamestown's darkest period. The people who had fled Jamestown now began to take refuge with the Powhatan tribes, and soon they became part of their society. During the harsh winter of 1609, there were 500 English in Jamestown, but by the end of the winter, only 60 of them barely survived. Snow and hunger had completely gripped the settlement. As soon as the weather improved, these survivors headed toward the shore, where they saw ships approaching from a distance. These ships were coming from England and carried Jamestown's new governor, Lord de la Ware, along with 150 others. The ships were loaded with large amounts of food and water. For the settlers who were nearly dead from hunger, these ships were nothing less than heaven. Their hearts were filled with this good news, and a hope for a new life arose. Filled with hope for life, they returned to Jamestown, but the sight before them was horrifying. In 1610, when de la Ware stepped into the fort, the place was deserted and in ruins. The living looked like corpses. De la Ware immediately arranged for the supply of food, and also began preparations for action against the Powhatan Confederacy. His first demand was that the Powhatan return the English who had fled during the Starving Time. But when the Powhatan refused, de la Ware sent a military detachment. The soldiers attacked a tribe, and whoever they found was mercilessly killed. The queen of the village and her 2 children were captured and sent by boat to Jamestown. On the way, the soldiers threw the children into the water and shot at them. The queen was brought to Jamestown to be burned alive, but the commander of the army felt pity and instead killed her with a dagger. It was clear that the Powhatan tribes could not remain silent in the face of such attacks. They could not openly attack the Jamestown fort because the British had cannons, but those who went outside the fort to the fields or for other work became easy targets. The supply of food was also cut off, forcing the British to seek a path of peace. The victory of peace negotiations came at the tip of the gun. The British kidnapped the Powhatan princess, Pocahontas. She was the same princess who had first given new life to Jamestown. With the help of a local chief, the girl was deceitfully placed on a British ship and became a hostage of the British. In 1613, Pocahontas was about 15 or 16 years old. After this abduction, the Powhatan Confederacy laid down their arms before the British, and the guerrilla warfare ended. The British forcibly converted Pocahontas to Christianity and gave her the name Rebecca. Later, she was married to an Englishman, John Rolfe. For the marriage, the ceremony formally sought permission from the girl's father, the Powhatan king, although in reality, he had no authority. Pocahontas revealed to the British a secret more valuable than gold or gold mines, the secret of tobacco cultivation. This secret would change English life in the coming centuries and lay the foundation for the establishment of a free America. Before Jamestown, the Spanish were growing tobacco in South America and selling it to Europe, holding a monopoly over it. A century later, this seed came into John Rolfe's hands, with whom Pocahontas was married. After the marriage, Pocahontas' knowledge and local agricultural skills produced the finest tobacco crops in Jamestown. Jamestown now began sending tobacco to England, ending Spain's monopoly. After the success of tobacco, people began coming from England and Europe to Jamestown to grow tobacco on the land. The colony transformed into a small town. In the first 11 years, there were only 100 women, who lived with their husbands or parents. As the number of men increased, the Virginia Company began regular commercial immigration of women. In 1619, about 90 women arrived in Jamestown and married settlers. Thus, families, farmhouses, domestic life, and tobacco fields grew together in the colony. The need for labor for these fields also increased, and the small settlement of Jamestown became a self-sufficient and profitable colony. The settlers could now establish farms on limitless lands as they wished, but the need for labor for these farms became a major problem. The solution to this problem was provided by an element that for centuries remained not only a necessity but also a problem for America, and even today is seen as a weakness in American history. This solution was African slaves. In 1619, a ship in Jamestown, with the help of a Dutch ship, captured a Portuguese ship carrying 50 black African slaves, including women and children. The farmers of Jamestown purchased 20 of these slaves, and thus began the 250-year period of slavery in America. The early settlers did not have much land, so they made small farms in their yards and backyards and began growing tobacco there. As the British population increased, they felt the need for new lands and took over the lands of the Powhatan Confederacy. Pocahontas, who had been the guarantor of peace between the British and the Native Americans, was no longer there. 3 or 4 years earlier, in 1616, Pocahontas had gone to England with her husband John Rolfe and their son. There, she received a grand reception at the royal court, was presented in Western attire, and given the Christian name Rebecca. This hospitality reflected how important the British government considered Pocahontas for the survival of Jamestown. But in 1617, during the return voyage to England, she fell ill and died at Gravesend, England. According to Native American tradition, her death was not natural but caused by poisoning. Pocahontas had become a legendary figure in history, inspiring many films and cartoons, including the 1995 animated film that depicted her in love with John Smith. Her death ended the era of peace between the British and the Powhatan Confederacy. Now the tribes were free and rose to defend their land. They began attacking new, unsecured British settlements around Jamestown. In one such attack in 1622, 377 British, including women and children, were killed, among them Pocahontas' husband John Rolfe. But this massacre did not stop colonization, and the British repeatedly defeated the tribes and seized their lands. In 1644, the Powhatan fought their final war for freedom against the British. It was a decisive battle in which 500 British and Europeans were killed, but the tribes lost and their king was killed. In 1646, the Powhatan surrendered, and the British enslaved them and took their lands under the name of peace. Thus, starting from the small settlement of Jamestown, the British, in just 29 years, had gained control over a large part of Virginia. The same English who once crowned the Powhatan king were now deprived of throne, crown, and land. Today, the remnants of this vast empire exist only in the 1,500-acre Pamunkey Reservation. Here the stony likeness of Pocahontas' father is carved, and some of his descendants still live. Similar reservations exist for other tribes in America, whose lands were taken by the British, Americans, and Europeans. After conquering Virginia, Jamestown was destroyed in 1699 but was rebuilt as a memorial, attracting tourists from around the world. Here, the model ships on which the first settlers arrived are displayed, and statues of Pocahontas exist both in Jamestown and in England. This is the story of when the British first settled in Jamestown and laid the foundation for the future superpower, America. After initial success, Jamestown developed not just as a settlement but as a strong colony, which later became the center of the independence movement. This was the same colony that organized farm labor through slaves, grew tobacco on the lands, and ultimately laid the foundation of America. Today, we see that every corner of Jamestown, every story, every struggle, is part of the creation of a great nation that changed the course of history forever. You are watching the finest documentary of American history on Unlocked History Hub. Tap this playlist to begin the series and explore every fascinating moment of America's history.